Okay, if folks are feeling comfortable with it, I think we'll get started. People might trickle in, but that's just the nature of these things. So, first of all, it's really great to have everybody here. My name is Andrew Elliott, and I'm with Northview Rising. And on behalf of NVR, I just want to, thank you guys for joining us tonight. We're going to be focusing on three primary areas in our conversation this evening. So we'll be talking about some of the specific challenges that Northview residents experience here in Manhattan. We're going to have a group conversation about inequity kind of more broadly and more personally. And then we're going to shift into a conversation that explores some of the ways that we can address the challenges that we'll be talking about and how we can create positive, lasting change for the Northview community. There aren't too many folks on tonight to really worry about policing Zoom or anything, but just like as a heads up, our general orientation of this stuff is to say, be comfortable with where you're at with Zoom. If you don't want to pop the camera on, if you don't feel like conversing, that's fine. If you're just here to watch and listen, that's great. If you want to participate, go for it. Emily is going to be monitoring the chat, so if that's a way that you feel comfortable to participate, we'll definitely like get your ideas and get you into the conversation that way. So, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with y'all. Emily, could you enable attendee screen sharing, please? And I would just ask that people don't go wild and start sharing their screens. Cool, thank you. Okay. Can everyone see a PowerPoint presentation? Awesome. Okay, so first, who we are. A brief word about NVR. This I'm going to read verbatim. We have this kind of identity, and we state it very intentionally. We're a group of community members that are seeking to improve health, equity, and well-being of the Northview community here in Manhattan. We really strive to engage and organize and act as a community to strengthen our solidarity and resilience. That's just like here's what's up. Here's where this is coming from. So that said, tonight we're going to be talking about the state of Northview. And I want to get us started by describing a few of the unique challenges that Northview is facing. So specifically, we're going to discuss how Northview residents are disproportionately and negatively impacted in two major areas. The first is in the city's policies for flood risk management. And I think everyone that lives in Northview knows this in a very personal and intimate way. And the second has to do with health inequity in Northview compared to the rest of Manhattan. So we're going to pose some questions to consider along the way as we kind of describe and unpackage things. We're also going to pause at certain points and talk about these things as a group. And towards the end, we're also going to do what we can to kind of like, however difficult things may be, we're going to put out for you both the solutions we come up as a group as a group tonight, and solutions and tools that we already have that we can use to effectively change our circumstances. So all of that said, let's start with what seems like maybe a simple question. Who shapes our neighborhood? And some kind of zooming out eagle-eye questions to attach to that. Do government policies reflect the interests of working class and low to middle income people? And do city policies reflect our interests? Now, this idea has actually been studied pretty thoroughly. So this graph here comes from a Princeton study that was done in 2014, and it shows the relationship between public opinion and how likely Congress is to vote on something related to that opinion. So the horizontal line we all see at the bottom there, from left to right, that shows from 0 to 100, the percentage of people that support a particular idea or position, right? And the vertical line from 0 to 100 shows the likelihood that Congress will vote in favor of something. So ideally, right, those should be 1 to 1. If 100% of people favor something, Congress should vote for it. If no one favors it, no one wants it, Congress shouldn't vote for it. It will not shock anyone that in practice, that is not what happens. And in reality, there's actually about a 30% probability of policy being adopted, no matter what the average US citizen wants, no matter what. So if 100% of citizens want something, there's a 30% chance that'll be adopted. If no one wants it, if it's extremely controversial, there's still a 30% chance that that's going to pass. And we know this, we feel this, and we see this in our politics. And it's one of the things that makes it so difficult to talk politics, right? It feels like there's this profound disconnect. And this study is showing us like, yes, in the data, that's true. You're not crazy, it's true. So it just shows us like there doesn't seem to be any direct public influence of congressional voting unless you're wealthy, because the graph we're looking at actually only applies to the bottom 90% of income earners in the United States. This graph, on the other hand, looks pretty different, right? And this reflects if you are in the top percent of income earners in the United States. So in this instance, we can see if 100% of the wealthiest 10% of Americans want something, not instead of 30% of a chance of them getting it, they have a 61% chance of getting it, right? They have almost a twofold factor of getting what they want. If they don't want something, look at that. It's zero. It doesn't happen, right? So if we ask that question again, we zoom back out, we go, do government policies reflect the interests of working class and low to middle income people? It looks like the answer is a strong no, at least at the national level, right? And again, I think we know this, but this is a way of just kind of like shoring that up pretty confidently. But what about locally? What about Manhattan? How can we make sense of the way this might look or might not look here? And I think a good question we can ask is, do city policies reflect our interests? So a good challenge to that question is to look at the Manhattan Levee Project. So we all pay taxes to support the expansion of the levee, right? For Manhattan residents, that's going to take the form of a 0.3% sales tax, or about $13.4 million. And to be really clear, right, no one's saying the levee is not necessary. For the geographic positioning of Manhattan and historically the way the city's been laid out, the levee is necessary. And there's some positives to list here, some essential things, right? It protects about 1,600 acres of land. Whoops, new slide. 7,600 residents, $1.4 billion of public and private infrastructure. But there are some things it doesn't do that are really, really critical, and this pertains to Northview. What it does not do is protect the residents of Northview. This map in yellow shows us areas that the levee's expansion are designed to protect. All that yellow with hashing. And the blue are areas that remain at a relatively high flood risk. And we can see very plainly, right, that Northview, just given the design of the levee, is exposed to potentially prolonged flood events and just at higher risk. So it's also important to understand that the levee uses the floodplain which Northview residents live in. We are on the floodplain, and it uses it as a temporary reservoir in the event of flooding. So raising the levee deepens and expands that reservoir. So if there is flooding, for Northview residents, that means more water longer. So if you live in Northview, right, just recapping this situation, you're paying for the levee expansion as a Manhattan resident. Your property value is very likely to be lower and impacted by being in that floodplain. Your insurance rates are higher. I know folks know this, and if you're a renter, that your landlord is very likely to raise your rent in correlation to this, right? So you're paying for this. Your risk of flooding also does not change, right? And in fact, the nature of flooding is potentially worse for you compared to the rest of Manhattan. Now, again, the city needs the levee as part of a broader flood risk management strategy, right? We need this. But the blanket approach of charging a sales tax without any kind of countermeasures for how it affects Northview disproportionately is problematic. I don't think I have to unpackage that idea. So that's a really unique position, right? And we would expect the city to engage with us about how the levee, its financing, and this general picture that I'm painting here disproportionately affects Northview residents, but it hasn't. Instead, the city has not offered any kind of compensation to account for the impact on land and property values in vulnerable areas like Northview. It's not proposed any alternatives for securing or creating a safe and affordable housing stock in Manhattan more broadly. And it's not even recognized this disparity in how their long-term flood risk management is unfairly impacting community members living on the other side of the levee, right? It's not a conversation that's being had. Now, this all sounds familiar, right, to the earlier study on public opinion. So again, the big takeaway here, public opinion among less wealthy folks has less impact on government policies. politicians have their ear to wealthy folks' interests, right? Because that's how politicians get elected. So the big takeaway in all of that is we're experiencing disparity. Change is not likely to happen top down. And this problem also appears in problems of health inequity, which I'll turn it over to Brandon and he'll unpackage a little bit of that for you guys.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so just notice also that this kind of decision making and maybe lack of engagement with the community is not disconnected from lived experiences and literally people's health. It's these kinds of decisions and systems in pretty literal terms, get under your skin. And one of the things I want to put in our toolbox here is some data on the health of our neighborhood. And so what you're looking at right here is estimates of life expectancy in different parts of Riley County. This data comes from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and they have this data on every county in the state of Kansas. And they break it down, in this case, by census tract. And so you may be thinking, well, this isn't our neighborhood, it doesn't look like neighborhoods. Well, it is pretty granular, and that's why I say neighborhoods. And so the number all the way to the right, the 78.5, that for in a big way represents the Northview neighborhood, which is to say that if you live in Northview, on average you can expect to live 78.5 years. Now, if you start to move west a little bit, and perhaps down towards the south, you'll notice that there's a census tract over there where the number in life expectancy is 86.1. That's a difference of about 8 years. And that is not insignificant. 8 years is a pretty long time, and a pretty powerful factor in the sense that the difference between these two neighborhoods is explained by where you live, right? And so what we hear a lot these days is your health is better explained by your zip code than your genetic code. And so when we think about some of the information that Andrew is putting out here, we can actually start to make sense of why these differences exist. There is a clear lack or difference in how we invest in these different neighborhoods. And it won't surprise other folks in the room to note that Northview is also a food desert, has among the higher concentrations of poverty in the community, and in many ways has poor access to basic services and healthcare. And all of these things come together in like this little soup of factors to help explain, and really, like I said before, get under people's skin. And so so we want to start to open up a little conversation here about what we've just shared, which is a lot. And some of this, again, folks in Northview, this will resonate with pretty deeply. But before we move on to some other portions of our talk tonight, what do people think of this? How are you reacting to the data and the concepts that we've just shared here? And we kind of, for about 5 minutes, want to do a little bit of sense making. And so we'll open it up. And again, you can either unmute yourself or type in the chat box, whatever you're most comfortable with.
I'll take a crack at it. Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm new to Northview area. I just moved here about 2 years ago. I used to live on the other side of the aqueduct on Ziondale for a while, and the flooding was majorly bad out there. I just lived just down the road from the UU church out there. I live over by Knox Circle, off of Knox Lane, so I'm a little close to the flooding, and I wasn't aware of this when I purchased my home. And it's my first home purchase. So a lot of this is new. Can you explain to me why there's such an underrepresentation for the Northview area, just other than socioeconomic factors with the city of Manhattan? Has there been any other reasoning why we're so unrepresented? Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. And is this Heather?
Yes, it is.
Heather, welcome to the neighborhood.
Yes.
Sorry to drop a bomb on your housing purchase. You're not the only one. And so you can come at, I think you can come at this from at least two directions. One being that, these are decisions being made about public dollars, and citizens have the opportunity to voice their concerns and opinions about how public dollars get spent in different ways, right? Like that we're all familiar with, elections, but also things like public comment, going to city commission meetings, calling or emailing, talking to your city commissioners, and what have you. However, you can also come at it from another direction, which is to say that local governments vary in their levels and extent to which they go out and engage the community as well. Surveys are not an unfamiliar thing to Manhattan and Manhattan residents. Sometimes focus groups. I know Parks and Rec does that quite a bit. And in the case of the levee, I think there were some of those kinds of conversations. However, let me just tell a very quick story about the community center that's in Northview that kind of, I think, illustrates a key point about this, which is that the community center that's being built next to the Eisenhower Middle School, there was a steering committee put together for that community center, designed to steer the design of that community center. However, out of 44 people on that steering committee, only 4 of them were actually from Northview. And,
oh, wow.
And there was really no intentionality in reaching people in Northview to be represented on that steering committee, and to essentially tailor that structure to the needs of the neighborhood beyond a very small sort of scope of questions and design options. And so
really quick, how long ago was that?
So there's room for more different types of engagement. That was it would have been spring of 2019, I want to say. Dominique was there. Dominique, do you remember?
Yeah, I want to say that it's a little sooner than that they formed the actual committee. But yeah, around that timeline.
Yeah. And one more thing that might also help us make sense of this is also connected to what Andrew was talking about with public policy, which is that people show up and say how they feel, and sometimes don't get heard, and so they stop showing up, right? And so I think it's all of these things that come together to explain, why people's voices are not being represented.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because I noticed when I moved in that I had a special property tax on top of my regular taxes, but yet I have seen absolutely nothing for it. We don't It took 2 years to get the potholes filled on our road. I don't see the money going anywhere. It just seems like we're getting taxed, but we're not getting any benefit from it. And I'm starting to discover this. I accidentally stumbled upon this group and this meeting, actually. I didn't even know this existed, and I'm kind of glad that I have come across this.
Really glad you're here too, Heather.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And thank you, Dominique, for the welcome.
Of course, Heather. I was going to say that you make an excellent point. You know, in Northview, we pay taxes just like every other community member within Manhattan. And I think you are not alone in wondering where our tax dollars are going. And more specifically, though, you know, we can access that information, that our dollars aren't going to work for us, if that makes sense, right? So the levy is, just to the point that Andrew made earlier, is an excellent example of that, that we, like others, are paying into the watershed or levee project, and yet it actually, while it does have benefits, as Andrew pointed out, it is actually worsening or exacerbating an issue for the Northview community and the members of the community. So yeah, just excellent point. Thank you for sharing that.
You had stated that we had very little representation when it came to the community center that was going to be built over by Eisenhower. How much representation does Northview have in the City Hall? Do we have anybody from Northview that's up in City Hall that's speaking on our behalf, or is from city or from the Northview area?
Well, we do have one city commissioner that was reelected, and she is a long-term resident of the Northview community. So that's one representation. In terms of city staff members that live in the Northview community, it's a great question, and I don't have the answer. Now, one could question, not to be disparaging, but how representative that commissioner is of the Northview residents. I'm speaking just personally. In my experience, I've seen that go in both directions from that particular commissioner. So an excellent question. And Brandon said that commissioners are at large and they're not ward-based. Yeah.
I was meaning somebody that actually was pushing for Northview's interest, and not just the interest of Manhattan as a whole, but has taken on Northview as a special project. I didn't know if there was anybody like that over there. Like I said, I'm used to being out in Ziendale. I was never considered part of the Manhattan area. I was just the Riley area, borderlining on, what is it called? Ziendale area.
Mm-hmm.
But this is all new, and I'd like to start getting a little bit more active because I live right across the street from the, I cannot remember the name of the trailer park, but the water the last flood came very, very close to my road. And I know that if we get even worse spring or summer than last year, it's going to be up to my doorstep.
Yeah. Well, to answer, and please others have as much information regarding the question that you had, and thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I mean, Northview Rising is a collection of those very folks, right, that have come together and that are thinking about equity and health equity, and just the broadly speaking, the health of our community. And so many of us have, in a number of different ways, gone to the city and are actively working to collaborate with city staff and or commissioners to forward to elevate the voices of Northview residents. So that's just one example, if that answers part of your question.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you guys all so much for speaking with me. I've hijacked this long enough. I'll let you guys get on with it. with what you were doing.
Well, Heather, I'm glad that we're going this deep here because what we really hope to surface tonight in future meetings is people's experiences here, right? Like we've been talking like at this, level to open this thing up, but we're really interested in hearing, what people's experiences have been like in the neighborhood, and if there's any connections between what what we've shared and the lived experience here. And guess what? I mean, it sounds like there is in your case.
Yes. Yes.
So I just, for the next few minutes, just open it up again for anybody else who wants to share. And Heather, I appreciate you sharing where you live in the neighborhood too. And if anybody else wants to share that as well, please do feel free. So just a couple more minutes, and curious if Olivia or Tim or Noodles, who's Noodles?
I have a question. And I'm Patty McKenna, and I actually live south of the park on Colorado Street, which manages to have a lower life expectancy than Northview. So winner for that, but I'm white, so that's probably okay. It seems like it's Northview, and the levee system sounds like Northview is a bit of a sacrificial place as far as the zoning went. And so I was wondering if any of you know some history of how it is that there's been so much development in what is a sacrificial floodplain area.
Dominique, do you recall that that history lesson we got over at the senior center?
I vaguely do, which is sad because it was an excellent presentation, but I am no historian. Broadly, I would say, Patty, that I think what you're alluding to is that the city, way before my 20 years, and I mean, it went way back, the history that Brandon and I were able to have shared with us. There was a decision made that they would create a floodplain of that area because of the of Tuttle Creek, and then at some point, obviously, they were allowed to the city opened that up for residential development. So I don't know. I don't know if you want to speak to that history a little bit more, Brandon. Actually, I think Andrew also has some of those pieces.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that we got the lowdown basically on Tuttle Creek itself, right? When they built that in like '54, I want to say.
Precisely, yeah.
If I'm wrong, but guess what? They built that with lots of interests out of Kansas City and what was it, the stockyards and agricultural interests, not in Manhattan. In fact, that the land that the dam was built on was some of the most fertile land on the planet, and they built a dam on top of it. And all of the towns around what is now the dam, guess what? They showed up with the proverbial pitchforks and campaigned hard to not have that thing built. And I'm talking local officials and state elected officials. Like, this kind of collective action is really in our blood here in Northview, and goes back to several decades.
Yeah, and if I recall, Brandon, not to get into the weeds of it, but if I recall, a lot of those efforts actually thwarted the development for quite some time. I hope I'm remembering that correctly. But then eventually, they were kind of bulldozed in their efforts, and I think to one of the points that you were also making, Brandon, all those families and townships were displaced as a result. And then, of course, moving forward, they decided to allow residential and commercial eventually development in this area. So,
can you guys hear me? This is Elaine Johannes.
Yeah, hey Elaine.
Hi, Brandon. So you are aware that I have history here longer probably than anyone who's maybe attending. We moved to Northview in 1989. And at that time, it was agricultural, primarily some McCullough development. Some of the older parts of Northview had been here, and it had been developed in order to grow Manhattan, but no one anticipated the flooding of 1993, and it came from a variety of issues. So we were here. We were aware that everything east of the Casement Road was at risk. So as far as why Manhattan allowed the Knox development, all that development, it was development, and the levee was to have protected it, but it did not. So after the 1993 flooding, there was a development proposed directly north of the Butterfield addition, which we live in. And there was activism. We beat it down. It was the Cohen-Esri development, the Kansas City developers. We had support from the city commission. They assisted us. The planning group, the planning and zoning department assisted us. Linda Morris, who's a city commissioner, assisted and told us how to get it done. There was activism. We were on TV. We had chats, we had meetings, we had door-to-doors, and we beat it back. And then, of course, development rules, because that's what brings revenue into a city that wants to grow. And so the development that's currently there is really what the Northview community said we wanted. We wanted housing. We wanted housing that people could live in, and there could be yards and kids and parks. And we were fine with that. What we didn't expect was the huge apartment complex north of that. And then, of course, like I said, we living here during the flooding did not expect that whole Knox addition. Heather, I don't know where you live, but where you described it, that is the addition that did have the flooding.
Yeah, I'm essentially on Knox and Casement. I'm right over there by Knox and Casement.
Right. So our house is in the corner of Casement and Butterfield. We're on a corner. We've been here since, like I said, 1989. And so from a historical perspective, Brandon is correct. We are activists. We have come from that. That's why I wanted to log on tonight to see what was happening with the Northview group, because I was part of that, that starting group that came from the Kansas Health Foundation grant about 2-3 years ago. So carry on, but know that we do have long history in working together, sharing concern, and going to City Hall, who has been supportive and has worked with us to beat back some of those interests that would have decimated us years ago. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Andrew, I'll turn it over to you. And I know Andrew's you got a few things to talk about. Well, what the heck can we do about this?
Exactly. Elaine, that is like the perfect segue for precisely that. Yeah. So what can we do? How do we continue this tradition of activism and advocating for ourselves? One thing that's really clear, right, from everyone's feedback is that we all have a vital stake in changing things. And even if you're not from Northview, just what we're describing, right, this isn't okay. And I think we all agree, right? It's critical that we understand that and do that as a community, right? These problems are too big for any individual or a small group of people to change. So a first step, right, seems pretty obvious. This is what we're doing right now. We're coming together. And this is critical. I really can't overstate this, right? We're coming together. We're talking about our problems as a community. We're trying to understand what's happening. And we're identifying this, right? We're vetting it out as lived experience from the bottom up and as like kind of a top-down view as well. So we're figuring out what needs to be changed. And it's simply to say, like, we can't solve problems if we aren't aware they're there to solve in the first place, right? But another aspect of that as well is visioning. That's like the next step up. Like, okay, we know what's wrong. How do we change that? So this is just like the phase of things where we dare to imagine what change could look like, right? Over the past few months, actually, NVR has worked with and put together, well, excuse me, let me start that over. Over the past several months, NVR has worked with KSU's landscape architecture program, and their students created and proposed a number of visioning projects that we shared and discussed at our most recent 2 neighborhood nights. And they are effectively visioning projects for us to address some of these very problems. So for example, as Brandon mentioned earlier, Northview is a food desert. I don't know if you guys are looking at that chart over there, but the US average, right, for being in a food desert, right, is 13.5% of folks. 100% of Northview's in a food desert. It's totally not okay. And because of the visioning efforts that the landscape architecture students projects put in front of us, we were able to envision what would community gardens look like? What could some tangible, slowly developed projects that are introduced as phases look like to address that? That's a really powerful step towards equity. Another step is direct action. NVR has actually set up a mutual aid network in Manhattan, Mutual Aid MHK. This is brass tacks. This is like a process of neighbors helping neighbors, right? This is getting people connected to community organizations that are doing active equity work and saving people from crisis often. I'm going to read a little bit of this that's actually on the chart because I'm really proud of what we're accomplishing as a community, right? Like Mutual Aid MHK is community members. It is neighbors. It's not some institution or organization. It's the folks on this call. It's literally your neighbors. So Mutual Aid MHK organized and launched in April, right? It's only been 6 weeks and we've raised almost $4,000 and dispersed almost all of that without any formal fundraising. And with those funds and with our volunteer coordination team and our community support, we've accomplished a lot. You guys can read through what some of those things are. I will say though, in the interest of time, I am gonna have to jump ahead a little bit, but I will point out a couple of things. Beyond the things you're seeing on this list, what's really exciting about mutual aid that goes beyond like the kind of crisis intervention part of equity or part of our work and addressing inequity is that we are connecting people to and our community to more resilient forms of equity and change. So that looks like, we're connecting folks to groups that are advocating for things like renters' rights, social and economic justice, and things like creating a living wage for folks living in Manhattan. So, right, the work is imperative, and it's all targeting this problem of inequity. And it's a reminder too, right? Like people that are struggling right now aren't struggling because COVID-19 rearranged this like really healthy, functioning economic and social system. They're struggling because our system already had massive gaps built into it. So that's what enterprises like NVR, MapJ, Mutual Aid MHK, this is the kind of stuff we're trying to address. Things like the pandemic, they just made the problem more obvious. Another tool that we've got to look at here is collective action. So earlier tonight, we talked about how public opinion amongst those of us that are less wealthy have less impact on government policies. And again, that's just right. That's brass tacks of elections, right? Politicians are focusing on how do I get elected? But we can get their attention, and we can do that through collective action. And I mean, this is a very simple but powerful tool that we've got where we can signal to politicians that we're organized, that we know what we want to need, and that we can influence and change their election campaigns. And I'll give you an example from right here in Manhattan where we've done exactly this, and that is the Old Blue River Trail. So in 2018, the city of Manhattan developed the OBRT, right? This was a response to a need for improved transportation equity, specifically in the Northview community, right? So there is goodwill there, right? There's some kind of intention there. It may be a little too late, but it's there. As the effort started manifesting, they created, right, this crushed limestone trail similar to linear trail. And they installed some really basic signage at the corner of McCall and Tuttle Creek Boulevard. However, right, some of the folks in Northview Rising and in another organization, Bike Walk MHK, they were focusing their work on this very issue of transportation equity, and they noticed some serious problems with the trail. For people that are needing to use that trail for employment, like a functional trail, not just a recreational thing, something that needed to be a stable form of transportation, it was not safe or reliable. It had no lighting, so it was unsafe to use at night. And because of the limestone surface, it wasn't accessible year round if you want to like ride a bike on it or if it snowed or, you get the idea. They also recognized that a lot of folks that could be served by the trail either weren't aware that it existed at all or didn't know where it led because, again, there wasn't really clear, well-placed signage from the point of view of the people that use it, right? The folks in Northview. Well, a member of NVR and Bike Walk MHK, Dominique Saunders, who, as you've heard her earlier this evening, she wrote a series of letters to the city and staff commissioners, city staff and commissioners. And she described the issue, emphasized a concern over a lack of equity. And she and other members from NVR and Bike Walk met with the city staff to discuss addressing those needs. And as a result of those discussions, I've skipped it. There's the letter, guys, in case you wanted to see it. As a result of those discussions, Dominique's letter writing and her persistent engagement with city officials and the 74 signatures that she was able to get from community members like yourselves, like us, all of that meant that the Eau Blue River Trail got permanent lighting installed, and additional signage is right now being planned to be installed through the city's Parks and Recs program. So all of that is an example of how we can create change, right? It's an example of what happens when a community exercises collective action. On that note, I'm going to link everyone, if I can do it expediently. Yep. Over in the chat, maybe I'll have to do this at the end. My chat is blocked up. At the end of our conversation tonight, I'm going to link everyone a form that is a sign-up sheet for a petition mailing list. And effectively, if you sign up for it, you're going to get emails that let you know when petitions like the one I just described are being sent out to the city of Manhattan or for any other kind of petition work in general. And you'll get that email, you read through it. If you like what you see, you can just reply yes or add my name, whatever, and we'll add your name, and that will grow our ability to exercise collective action. We can go from 74 signatures, which got lights installed on a trail and signage, to who knows what, right? And the bar of entry is very low, right? You get the email, you like what you see, you say yes. So covered a lot of stuff tonight, right? So like just to recap, big takeaways here. The Northview community, okay, I think we all get it. We're in a marginalized position in Manhattan. We see it in our flood risk management policies. We see it in health inequity, and we see it in things like food insecurity and transportation inequity. All the things we've kind of flown through tonight. That said, we also have lots of tools to change these circumstances. So we've described some of them, right? We've got community visioning, like with this idea of community gardens being proposed by the landscape architecture students. We've got direct action in forms like mutual aid, and we've got things like collective action through petition and signing. There's even more we can do together, but all of this is where we're at just right now, and this is a really powerful place to begin and to work with us and to work together. Oh man, we're finished with slides, and I can see everyone's beautiful face again here in a second here. Okay, so I think this leaves us at a good place for our last 10 minutes or so. And I'm going to put this petition link over here in the chat now that I can see it again. But I want to turn it over, and I think I'll have Brandon, if you want to like lead us in like a group reflection, like how we can make sense of this and like what next steps are, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we've got about 10 minutes left here, and as Andrew said, let's just do a little bit of a sense-making group of reflection. I might invite us to think about a couple of questions here. Number one, and kind of carrying along this theme of like, well, what if? Like, what else is possible here, right? Like, start to use some imagination. What do you think, right? Like, what else could we do in Northview? Assuming we come together, we do, direct action, we do collective action. What do you think? And then number two, like, can you, in what ways could you see yourself being involved in this? And I'll just leave it at those two questions and open it up.
I may ask about some of the work that the group has done before around food access and gardens. Has that moved ahead, or are there barriers?
I can jump in on that, Brandon, if you yeah. So I can speak to NVR right now. The work that I referenced earlier is coming from the Kansas State University's landscape architecture program. So largely that was a collaboration to kind of explore what would it look like if that particular department really emphasized community engagement and oriented their students' project proposals towards something like equity work, right? Which is not unknown to them. It's not unfamiliar. They actually have a bit of a history doing that. But what would it look like if they did that locally? And right now, I think I can say we're in the space of having just tried like a pilot experience of this over the last semester, which unfortunately, because of the pandemic, a lot of the nature of that like got completely knocked off course, like very obviously, right? We no longer could meet in person. It was pretty challenging, but regardless, the students managed to get good proposals, which again, we at NVR are understanding that as like, that's a visioning tool. The implementation of that, I don't know how much of that is realistically going to come from the landscape architecture program, but that's also not to suggest that like we aren't trying to actively continue cultivating that relationship, not only to continue visioning, but to see what would it look like in very incremental phases to tangibly make some of those changes, to go from visioning to something more substantive. But that's still in a pretty exploratory phase. I think because not only of the transition I mentioned with COVID-19 in this last semester, but it's still really, I think, up in the air as to what even next semester is going to look like. And then in terms of active efforts for NVR, it's something that I know a couple members feel really passionately about and have just not had an opportunity to really explicitly explore, but it's a tool. And, you know, if we have more folks that are excited about that idea, you know, the more on board, the more we can do.
Heather just had an idea that she typed into the chat box about the idea of placing little houses around the Northview area, such as at the parks. And little houses are those small book sharing program that will help increase literacy for everyone, especially for kids. So I really like that idea a lot, Heather.
Yeah, this is Dominique. I was just about to respond to you in the chat. I think it's a wonderful idea. I live in one of the two cooperatives in the Northview area, and actually am trying to forward conversations with the board of the one that I live in to implement something like that, at least for the co-op, something that would serve as both a free little library and what people are calling a blessing box, so that would have food and other necessary items. I think what we could do if there was enough collective interest, again, this is just kind of off the cuff thought, would be to work with the Parks and Rec program at the city. And even if there wasn't funding for them to actually build those, you know, it could be a beautiful collaboration between working with the city to have consent to put it in those public areas that you mentioned, and then working just amongst community members to actually build and get those things into place.
Can I speak to the gardening thing? And this isn't maybe the forum for it. I've been working pretty heavily to get a pilot project going for gardening teams for next year, basically inspired by my making it through a pandemic by having roommates and covering my front yard with dirt and intending to grow lots of food and feed ourselves and share it with the neighbors. And so my concept, and I'm hoping to get grant funding for this, although it's not strictly requiring outside money, but is to basically have a pilot project next March to September of 5 gardens with teams of 4 to 6 people who garden together. They grow food, they eat it. That's the basic. Have a set of tools that is provided to each team, have a set of seeds that is brought. Each garden would be 4 4x12 beds. I went and spoke to Carol Barda, who is the manager of the community gardens, and she said it would take she was the one who suggested the number of beds. I asked the question, how much room would it take to make a difference in the food security of the 4 people gardening? And she said, you know, here's a raised bed in my yard. If you had 4 of these, you know, properly planted with the seasons, that would have an effect. So So I don't know whether, I haven't reached out to people in Northview. Currently it has sort of shifted from a concept of finding homeowners who are willing to share some of their land to a concept of maybe a church or a school could do that. Anyway, that's just something I'm working on, and perhaps it would be of use to folks in Northview.
That's great. Thanks, Patty. That's one of the reasons why I like these kinds of conversations where I know you don't live in Northview, but you know, we can be doing this kind of resource sharing and visioning, not just for our neighborhoods but across our community. And so I think it's really powerful. We've been talking about that up in River Chase too. We only have a couple of minutes left, and so if maybe there was like one more comment or reflection that anybody wanted to share, and then we can start to close up.
I just wanted to mention very briefly that we have a new principal coming in at Northview Elementary, and based on a conversation that I had with somebody who talked to him, he's really interested in the idea of community garden there. I'll go talk to him.
Can you say where that was again? Although I don't want to step.
Northview Elementary School.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Doug.
Right next to Elaine.
That's great. Great ideas, y'all. You know, there's nothing in principle that keeps us, you know, from doing those things. It's really people. You know, if we have people, if we have passionate people who are willing and able to do these things, no reason why we can't do them. Like we can definitely find a way. Andrew, I'll toss it back to you.
Cool. I think a really important thing to share, because I feel like a lot of collaborative energy coming off of everybody. In the chat, there is a link to a sign-in sheet. If you guys want to stay in touch, if you're interested in what NVR is doing, fill that thing out, and we will get on your radar. And it's just a really good way to stay in touch with one another. I'm also going to link again, because I know it's easy to get stuff lost in the chat, to that petition sign-up sheet. Those two things shared. Yeah, I think it's only appropriate to thank you all again for joining us tonight. Thank you for your time and your energy and your attention. Thank you to all of our Northview neighbors. Thank you to Heather for like serendipitously popping in and getting to meet all of us. It's nice to meet you virtually. You guys' presence and thoughts and your attention and our energy together. This is what we're all about. So I know I can speak for myself and for everyone in NVR. Like we're very grateful to have been able to share this with everyone tonight. So,
yep.
So yeah, thank you guys.
Patty, my email is Benson, BENSONM.
Oh, that one. BENSON, yeah.
M for modern, L for languages @ksu.edu.
I like it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Andrew, I'm
All
sorry.
right, thank you guys.
I'm sorry I'm late. Will the recording go onto the Google Docs?
Yeah, we're going to put that's a great question, Doug. Thank you. We are actually going to take the whole thing and we're going to put it on the Facebook page so that it's just there for folks to look at, because I think this is a good conversation that's like, there's just a lot of great information that was shared tonight.
Okay. Since I'm not on Facebook.
I will find a way to get you a personalized, customized file then.
Thank you. Or just put it on Google Docs, yeah.
Yeah.
Either way. Okay, thanks. Night, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.